Hey guys, just changed house recently. As you can see, my new castle is in the background there. For anyone who thinks it looks suspiciously like Shuri Castle in Okinawa, you've got me guys. I'm just toying with the idea of green screen so that I can present more professionally. Now, in this video I want to address the question made by my Taekwondo friend Matt, who I have to correct my last video. I said he comes from Canada, and he indignantly corrected me and said he comes from the USA. But anyway, how long should it take to get a black belt? Well, before you can answer that, you first have to ask the question, what is a black belt? Now, a black belt is many things to many people. In its simplest sense, it's just a piece of material that you wear around your waist that means that you've been training for X amount of time. But I think that most people would be very unhappy with that definition. Now, in my style, a black belt takes approximately 5 to 7 years to get, and I think that that's fairly standard for karate style. Some a year or so quicker, some a year or so slower, and it's completely relative to their syllabus. And that, I guess, is an important point, that a black belt is not an objective standard. It's a subjective standard according to the values of your style. Now, that being said, I think the general public, if you said to them that you were a brown belt or a purple belt or a red belt, they would look blankly, how good is that? But if you say a black belt, it's a universally recognised standard by those who don't know martial arts for competence. Possibly even lethal competence, you know. It goes along with the myth that you need a license to protect yourself with karate, or you need to give 3 warnings before you defend yourself. But I think that a fairly good standard, a fairly common standard for a black belt is the one utilised by my style, GKR, which is that a black belt means that you are competent at the basics, even a master at the basics, although, you know, I've had my black belt for some time and I certainly don't feel like a master, but I would like to think that I'm competent at the basic techniques. Now, in whatever style you do, I've done jiu-jitsu, I've done goju, I've done GKR, I've done sesinu, I've done a lot of styles over the years, and their basic syllabus varies according to what the tenets of the style are. So say a Hapkido or Taekwondo style, their basic syllabus is much more kick oriented. Jiu-Jitsu would have lots of throws and break falls and pressure points in. But whatever your syllabus is, I would assume that you are competent in the basics to deserve a black belt. Now, unfortunately, in the modern world, a black belt has become a marketing tool, and I trained when I was a youngster in a kung fu style, very briefly, where you could get a black belt in a year, and then they went and did a demonstration in the town with all of their black belts and got laughed out of the town centre because their martial arts was appalling. By the same token, there was also a karateka in my town who had a 9th dan. He was in his early 40s, he was a 9th dan, and he had 2 19-year-old twin sons who were both 6th dans. And again, I think that kind of makes a mockery of the whole idea. You know, Rick talked a while ago about ninjutsu styles where you can be a 15th dan, and when a black belt is used as a marketing tool, then I think that is the one time when it can reasonably be criticised, because what happens is it leads to a dan grade arms race where the general public, not knowing how a grade system works, they just look at the number of dans and they think that that means competence. So therefore they think a 6th dan is better than a 3rd dan is better than a 1st dan. And of course, if you can be a 6th dan in 5 years and you know, and another style you wouldn't even be a 1st dan, then obviously there's not a direct equivalence. So it's a bit of a shameless marketing tool and a byproduct, sadly, of commercial martial arts, or maybe just small egos, I don't know which. But I would say my instructor says of a black belt that he would expect that a black belt could defend himself against anybody significantly stronger than him or significantly bigger. And I think that's a fairly reasonable definition. I'm not sure that I agree with it, but I think it's reasonable that you would have martial competence and be able to defend yourself to get a black belt. Now, for some styles, a black belt is more about a state of mind. It represents loyalty, it represents persistence, it represents knowledge. I know some styles where you can't get a black belt until you've taught for a while. I know some styles where you can't get a black belt until you've written, you know, a 5,000 word essay on what it would mean to be a black belt. Which, to be honest, I quite like the idea of, I have to admit. Now, you talked about training frequency, and I think you know, it's fair enough to say that you train 3 times a week, maybe up to 12 hours in a week, and some people may criticise the fact that you got your black belt in 3 years, and then they compare you against somebody who trains once a week for 5 years, and actually you've done more time. Now, I would add a caveat to that it doesn't matter how often you train if all you just do is turn up and do the same thing. You know, we have a saying, have you done 50 different classes in a year, or have you done the same class 50 times? And I know lots of students have been training for almost a decade, and they just turn up and they just go through the motions every single week. And it's only when they take ownership of their martial arts and really try to understand and improve themselves, so each week they turn up with an objective. You know, I never ever walk into a dojo without an objective for what I want to get out of whatever is in that session. You know, I'm not lethally competent by any means. You know, I mean, I could probably kill somebody, as most black belts could, but you know, I'm not any kind of ninja by a long way. But I do seek to improve myself. Personally, it took me 7 years to get my black belt, and in my style, we also have what you call a zero dan. In our style, we call a shodan ho, or a provisional black belt, which is, I think that the raison d'etre behind it is that you get the black belt, but you have to prove that you're worth it. I think it's a bit silly, really, because, you know, you've spent the last 5 or 7 years proving you're worth it, and you shouldn't be going through the grading if you're not. It seems a bit politics to me, actually, which is something I'm going to talk about, black belt politics, at some stage, but not for this one. Again, of course, you train. You could train 6 times a week, but if your class is only 15 minutes a class, you know, my instructor class that I go to is 2.5 hours long. So, you know, that's worth something. But that being said, you can't force feed knowledge. You need some time for it to sink in. So even if you did 6 2-hour classes a week, your brain needs time to process. Your body needs time to adapt to unconscious competence and proprioception. So that it will naturally go to the things that you're learning, and you can learn them more quickly by more practice. But in actual fact, studies have shown that the optimum number of times training is 3.5 per week. Again, it doesn't cite the number of hours, but you know, I think it's to do the same as with bodybuilding, that you need off days, you know, for everything to kind of settle in. So I guess ultimately a black belt is only meaningful within your style. My friend Damien Birch said that. He's a double black belt in, I think he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu and a black belt in karate, and he always says that a black belt is not an absolute standard. That my black belt is not the same as your black belt, because the requirements in your black belt are different to the requirements for my black belt. So it's pointless to compare them to each other, you know. And I don't just mean the requirements, but you know, if you wanted to have an objective standard for a black belt, then you would have to have a universal syllabus, because an objective standard can't exist when you have philosophical and physical differences and tactical differences in the way that the styles train. You know, you train with a lot of kicking. I train with a balance between kicking and punching. Some styles train with a lot of pressure points. You know, how can they tell me what my black belt should be worth? Now, you did address the subject of children getting black belts. In my style, you can get a black belt as young as 11, but it's on average is 13 is the youngest that you can get it, unless you're exceptional. Personally, I don't agree with kids having black belts. A black belt changes you when you receive it. It changes your mindset. When I first saw myself in the mirror with a black belt, I looked like a totally different person. I felt like a totally different person. That lasted for about 6 months. And I will say it gave me more confidence, and it gave me a belief in myself. Now, I think kids... You mentioned that the frontal cortex doesn't stop developing until about the age of 25, and I would say that means that kids are extremely good at copying, but they're not very good at making live tactical decisions. So kids, you know, there's a reason, for example, why teenagers' car insurance is so high, and that's because they're reckless, and that's because they have no sense of their own mortality. So you're giving something to people which is like a license for them to, well, not a license, but, you know, they are emboldened by the fact that they are now a black belt. And the fact is, they don't have the physical strength, they don't have the emotional maturity, and they don't have the, they just don't have the calm that is needed. You know, I mean, I'm not a particularly calm person, but as a child, you know, you're just not making good decisions yet. So to give a black belt to somebody, you know, age 11 or whatever age, you know, I've seen a style where somebody got a black belt at age 4, and it was like, oh, the world's youngest black belt, oh, isn't he marvellous, you know? Well, look, he can move his arms and legs around. Now stick him in a ring and see what he can do. Now stick him in a self-defence situation and see what he can do, you know? Again, it's the arms race. So the sensei wants to be the sensei of the youngest black belt. And he's done the kid a great disservice. And has the kid learned patience? No. Has the kid learned discipline? No. Has the kid learned, has he learned tactics? Almost certainly not, because he's not capable of understanding them at that age. So all he's good at is moving his arms and legs around in a style of whatever his style has to do for black belt. So anyway, guys, yeah, a black belt is only worth what your style says it's worth, and you know, for somebody else to look at you and say you're not worth a black belt because you got it in 3 years, or, you know, you're not worth a black belt because you got it in 5 years instead of 10, it's just that martial arrogance. It's the same kind of martial arrogance as you find on the website Bushido, where everybody's pointing the finger at everybody who doesn't do martial arts exactly as they think it should be done, and it's just people with very narrow minds, I think, who think that their view is the only view of martial arts that has any value. And you know, as far as I'm concerned, I've got no time for those guys. So anyway, look, you take care, guys. Hopefully those of you who haven't yet reached black belt are well on your way. And for those of you who have made it, congratulations, keep on trucking.